As far as I can tell, no one is imposing unilateral sanctions against the United States. We, as the Russian Federation, are, in principle, not supporters of methods that undermine international, economic, and other relations.
Lavrov, who only recently promised that Russia would support Iran, has now stated that there will be no sanctions imposed on the United States. We'll talk about this with Oleksandr Kraiev, expert at Ukrainian Prism think tank, SNE lecturer at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Oleksandr, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Great, nice to be here.
Oleksandr, the U.S. embassy in the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, was attacked by 2 drones believed to be Iranian, causing a minor fire and limited damage to the building. U.S. President Donald Trump pledged to respond to the attack. So what do you think about this attack and what's next?
Well, that's a logical consequence of everything that was going on for several days already. I do believe if Trump will be told about this attack, the retaliation will be quite swift. So basically, we will see a more imposing and more dreadful strikes against the Iranian Ayatollah regime. So, but I don't think this changed something drastically, or this changed something in particular. Basically, the war is already there. The direct confrontation has already reached its peak. So an attack on embassy will not be something out of control or out of hand. That's just of the part of the conflict that we are having right now. So I don't see any serious repercussions to that.
Oleksandr, and we remember that on the evening of March 1st, an Iranian drone struck the key British Royal Air Force base in Cyprus. In doing so, Iran reportedly attacked a European country for the first time. Why was Starmer's response relatively restrained, in your opinion?
Well, because we do see that Europeans, generally speaking, are trying to limit their response, apart from the Brits, because the British armed forces have been told about this operation. They have been the part of the operation because the United States used several British bases in order to launch an attacks against Iran. So basically, only the Brits are there to respond, are there to help the Americans in this operation. As for everybody else, well, we still do not see any concurring and common position between the European states, because they have no common position, to be honest. They have different views on the Iran nuclear deal. They have different views concerning Israel and its war against Hamas. They see different views on the military engagement as a principle. So basically, we cannot say that, for example, Greece perceives the military engagement the same as, for example, France or the United Kingdom or Italy. So unfortunately, that was just one another example of how Europeans lacked common foreign and policies. And that was one another example of how NATO as an alliance cannot bring their permanent members together, cannot bring their total strengths together. And unfortunately, everything is done either bilaterally or single-handedly. Even with the informational reaction towards United States action against Iran, we see different reactions from European leaders posted at different times with absolutely different texts and messages. So unfortunately, as I have already stated, that's just another example of lack of unity within our European partners.
Unfortunately, and in Cyprus, debris from a Shahed drone that targeted airbase contained a 4-channel Kamita antenna manufactured in Russia. So Russia is effectively involved here. What should the response be?
I think first and foremost, we should see some activity from Ukrainian diplomacy, because generally speaking, we are the one who are constantly telling the West that, for example, Russians are using Western main components and that the secondary sanctions should be in place. We are the ones that providing evidences to such malign activities and to such sanction regime breakings. And this is the time when, once again, we should tell them in a very posh manner, see, we told you about this cooperation and you did nothing. because basically not the sanction regime against Iran, neither the sanction regime against Russia were able to stop this interchange, this intercourse between Moscow and Tehran on enhancing their military capabilities. And as I said, it was Ukrainian diplomacy and Ukrainian military leadership who told our Western allies, even starting 2022, that this cooperation between Moscow and Tehran will one day shot against the Western powers themselves. And so we see the results now. So the good consequence of such a development, of such an occurrence, should be not only additional sanctions against Russia, but also the additional weapons and additional reconnaissance being provided to Ukraine in order for Ukrainian armed forces right inside Russia. So basically, after such an event, no additional discussions on whether Ukraine should be allowed to strike inside Russia should take place. Yes, we should be able to strike inside Russia. Yes, we should be able to destroy their military capabilities in their industrial base, because as of now, it's not only about Ukrainians being in danger, it's also Europeans being in danger. I know it sounds cynical, but if it is something necessary for Europeans to finally understand the limits and the danger of the whole Iran-Russia cooperation, well, that's the case.
And Lavrov mentioned sanctions. We saw the video at the beginning of our conversation. Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov stated that Russia will not impose sanctions on the United States over the war in Iran, as this is not its method. This is ridiculous. How should this be understood?
Well, that's just Russia being Russia. That's part of the Russian propaganda. Everything from their perspective, from their point of view, everything Russia is doing is okay, but everything the United States is doing is wrong. Let us not forget that even their strategic documents, for example, the famous Gerasimov doctrine, the doctrine of the hybrid warfare, was not created as a Russian doctrine, but merely from the point of view of Gerasimov, it was the basically his outline the Western strategy in the Middle East during 2010-2012. So I believe that's the same case here, the same case of double standards, the same case of propaganda, and the same case of Russians whitewashing themselves, just showing everybody their true nature, but at the same time trying to sell this idea to their population, that everything the West is doing is hideous and illegal and malign, but at the same time everything Russia is doing is because Russia had this sensitive mission, this messiah type of cult of personality that prohibits them from thinking wrong about themselves.
Oleksandr, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar are asking allies to help persuade US President Donald Trump to shorten the duration of the military operation against Iran. One of the reasons cited is limited stocks of air defense interceptor missiles. Bloomberg reports, citing sources. How limited could these stockpiles be, in your opinion, and what challenges might arise as a result?
Basically, I do see that the problem will be there even for Europeans to provide enough interceptor missiles, interceptor drones and everything, because they cannot even provide them for themselves. Let us not forget the even comically strange situation with Russian drones getting into Polish airspace, getting into German airspace, getting into the Netherlands airspace. So basically, unfortunately, the Europe is not self-sustainable and decisive enough to protect themselves from the possible Russian or Iranian drone attack. And what can be said about the Middle Eastern powers? I suppose that unfortunately they will get the necessary attention and the necessary support from the Europeans. But at the same time, I do appreciate and I do applaud Ukrainian diplomacy stepping in and for being ready to provide specialists and interceptor technologies for these Gulf states, for Arabian states of the Gulf and generally of the Middle East, in order to protect themselves from Shahed drones and Iranian ballistic missiles. Because even if we do see European states failing to provide enough and failing to provide the necessary type of equipment and failing to provide the necessary specialists, there is always Ukraine. Ukraine with the utmost number of shot down Iranian type missiles and drones, Ukrainians with unique experience and unique understanding of how the modern warfare should be conducted. So in this regard, I should say that European fails to provide additional support will most probably result into Ukrainian diplomatic victories in that regard.
And remember that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky proposed to send in Ukraine's top drone interception experts to the Middle East if regional leaders can convince Vladimir Putin to agree to a 1 month ceasefire in Russia's war against Ukraine. About China, China is quietly pressuring Iranian officials, urging them to avoid actions that could disrupt Qatari gas exports or other energy shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Bloomberg reports, is Beijing's pressure on Iran a sign of China's real influence in the region? How critical is the stability of the Strait of Hormuz to China?
Well, China needs all the necessary logistical and infrastructural choke points and bottlenecks in order for their economy to strive and in order for their interdependent the other states, especially with the resource bases in Africa and Latin America, to apply for their economy. So basically, that's something that created modern China. That's something that provided for modern Chinese leadership and capabilities. So, of course, China will pressure Iran, but at the time, we should point out that it's not about Chinese influence or it's not about Chinese strengths. Moreover, I do believe it is about Chinese weaknesses. Let us not forget that 3 days before the American attack against Iran, we heard China saying that they will provide for security and defense of Iran against any possible aggression. So where are those Chinese defenders now? Where are they? Where's their technologies and everything to provide from future aggressions on the part of the United States or its allies? Well, China failed Iran. China, well, I can go as far as saying China betrayed Iran in that regard. They did not protect them, just as Russia betrayed Iran, because Russia had this security deal with Iran when the attack on the one should be perceived as attack on both of them. So in that case, in that regard, I do believe that China pressuring Iran to get something done with Hormuz, or just generally China pressuring Iran in relation to the American attack is not Chinese strength or is not Chinese influence. It's the dire situation that Chinese economy is in right now. And it's a sign of Chinese weakness, not Chinese strength.
Oleksandr, and China considers unacceptable any attempts to link mainland China's actions regarding Taiwan with strikes carried out by the US-Israeli coalition against Iran. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said at the briefing, the question remains whether China could attempt an operation against Taiwan while the United States is preoccupied with conflict in the Middle East. Could China take advantage of US engagement in the Middle East to intensify its actions regarding Taiwan?
I do believe such a scenario is still possible, but only in case if the United States will take the decision to get into the full-fledged land operation in Iran. So basically, if Trump's rhetoric about getting full-on military operation, getting boots on the ground in Iran and getting involved into a year-long conflict with unpredictable repercussions. In that case, I do believe China may use this opportunity. But apart from that, I do believe that China is on a very thin ice there, because you see, if the Americans will be able to resolve all the issues with Iran quickly enough, as President Trump said, within 3 to 5 weeks, then the Americans will be once again in the righteous power to strike China in case of something going on with Taiwan. So basically, the United States, if they will be winning this engagement, well, then it will be a problem for China, and then anything against Taiwan will be met with strength, or as Trump put it, with fire and fury. But if the United States will get into this, as they call it, Middle Eastern quagmire, if they will get the full-fledged land operation, which will stretch throughout the years, not only 1 year, but several years, in that regard, yes, the United States will be totally preoccupied with the Middle East, and then both Russia and China may intensify their attacks. Respectively, Russia against Ukraine and China may do something against Taiwan. Once again, it all depends on the solution or on the decisions that Trump administration will take concerning the land forces being used against Iran.
Oleksandr, and more about Russian Federation, the war in the Middle East benefits Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, while the US strikes Iran. Russia quietly gains advantages. Forbes reports that the first and most obvious benefit is rising oil prices. Can we frame the first reason as follows? Oil prices are rising, and Russia is profiting. In other words, the primary and most obvious benefit is higher oil prices.
Well, the oil prices are higher right now, but that's the general trend part of the year, because currently everybody is replenishing the losses from the winter heating season and from the winter season as it is. So base prices have risen already since the start of the year by more than 20%. So it's a natural phenomenon for oil market. After the beginning of the operation, we can predict the additional rise to up to 5 or 7% in the prices of the main marks of oil, but nothing more than that. So basically, yeah, Russia is profiteering from the situation. Russia is taking more profits from oil trade and everything, but at the same time, Russian oil trade is strictly limited to China and Chinese counterparts, or to Chinese influenced markets. And Russia is in the situation where they cannot rely on national price tags. They cannot rely on the general market trends, just because China puts their own labels and puts their own prices on everything that Russia is selling them. So yeah, Russia is definitely profiting from it, but not on the level that Russia wanted to. And so basically, I don't think that within the general geopolitical situation as of now, that can change the situation totally, or that is something that will basically change the direction of the talks between Russia, United States, and Ukraine into the pro-Russian talks. So yeah, they are profiteering, but not geopolitically speaking.
Oleksandr, the US first attempted to kidnap Maduro, and now they have killed Khamenei. Could Putin also be at risk? What logic does Trump use in selecting his targets?
Well, I sure do hope so. I sure do hope that Putin is in danger and Putin can be next. But at the same time, we should also understand that as of now, the United States are trying to influence smaller countries. They're trying to influence somebody who cannot retaliate with nuclear arms. They try to influence somebody who is dependable on Russia, who is dependable on China, who is definitely not in a position to retaliate against the United States by their own means, somebody who is much, much weaker than the United States. So that can also explain their ambition towards Greenland. They can also explain a lot of their other international agenda items. So although I will be very glad to see the same Maduro-style operation taken against Putin, I don't think it's possible in the nearest future.
And about negotiations, about the war in Ukraine, the president of Ukraine stated that the next round of trilateral peace talks could take place within days. In Europe, possible venues include Switzerland, Turkey, Austria, or the Vatican. Is it realistic to hold a new round of negotiations in the coming days or weeks? What do you think about this?
I don't think that before any finalization of the American operation against Iran, we will any type of talks being conducted, because it's just not possible to conduct such talks effectively during the United States being involved in a full-scale military operation against Iranian regime and its allies and its proxies such as Hamas or Hezbollah. So I don't think that it will be just feasible, not even possible, but feasible to hold such talks, because sin is narrated and circulating around American actions against Iran. So I do believe that we will see the reinstallment of the negotiation by the end of March, if everything goes along to plan, according to plan of the Americans, or somewhere in April, when the dust will settle, when the new meeting between Trump and Xi will take place, and when this operation will eventually be over.
Oleksandr, we're waiting, and I thank you so much for this interesting, as always, conversation. Thanks for supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian people. Oleksandr Kraiev, expert at Ukrainian Prism think tank, senior lecturer at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, was with us today. We wish you all the best. Wish you a productive day.
Thank you.
And see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.